You know, so often we look at politics as just a game of winning and losing, but we're here to look at it differently. We see an electoral map for what it truly should be, a blueprint for governance. Today, our focus is on a single constituency, a place with a story that's written in its soil, and you can see it in its voting patterns. Think of this as a diagnostic, a deep dive into the anatomy of a mandate, to understand not just how to win, but how to earn the right to govern.
Our journey takes us to the Tening Constituency, right in the Perrin district of Nagaland. This is a land reserved for scheduled tribes, home to proud people with deep-rooted traditions. And to understand the politics, well, you have to first understand the place, and more importantly, the hopes and expectations of its people.
And that really gets to the heart of this kind of analysis. It's the core principle. The numbers, the trends you're about to see, they aren't just points on a chart. Not at all. They're the vital signs of a community. They tell us exactly where trust has been broken, and they show us quite precisely how it can be rebuilt. This is all about using data to serve people.
So here's the path we'll take today. First, we'll feel the pulse of Tening. Then we'll dissect the anatomy of its electoral mandate. After that, we'll diagnose the core problem, what we see as a deep trust deficit. From there, we'll lay out a blueprint for governance. And finally, we'll connect it all back to its ultimate purpose, turning data into dignity.
Every constituency has its own unique character, its own rhythm. So before we jump into any numbers, we have to understand the ground reality, the people, their identity, and the context of their lives. So let's begin our deep dive into Tening Song. So what are we looking at here? We're in Perrin District, and the seat is reserved for scheduled tribes. Now that's a fundamental piece of its political and social fabric. In 2023, the electorate was just over 27,000 people, and the incumbent is Namri Nachang of the NCP. These aren't just statistics, they're really the DNA of this constituency.
Now this is what's really fascinating. A voter turnout of over 83% is, well, it's remarkably high. And if you look back, historically it's been even higher, at times touching 94, even 96%. So this isn't a story about apathy. The people of Tening are deeply invested in their democratic voice. They show up, they vote, and they expect to be heard.
And this really captures the core tension in Tening. You have this incredibly high participation, this energy, but it doesn't translate into stable political loyalty. Instead, what you see are allegiances that are fragmented, shifting, creating a really volatile political landscape. And what that tells us is that while voters are engaged, they are certainly not satisfied. They're constantly searching for leadership that actually delivers.
All right, let's move to the hard data. To really understand the political health of Tening, we have to look at its history. The numbers tell a story of fractures, of fevers, and a real search for a cure. This is the anatomy of the mandate.
Now look closely at this data with me. In 2013, the NPF wins with about a third of the vote. 5 years later, in 2018, their vote share is almost identical, but they lose to the new NDPP-BJP alliance by a razor-thin margin. And then, 2023. The NPF vote share doesn't just drop, it completely collapses to an almost non-existent 0.17%. The seat changes hands again. The pattern is crystal clear. No single party has a dominant long-term hold here. Wins are narrow and loyalties are incredibly fluid.
This chart, this is what a political earthquake looks like on paper. Going from holding a solid 1/3 of the entire vote in 2018 to virtually zero in just 5 years. This isn't just a numerical shift, you see. This signifies a complete and total breakdown of the relationship between a political party and its voters. A trust that was built over years just vanished. The question is, why?
Well, we have a name for this phenomenon. We call it anti-incumbency volatility. The voters of Tening simply do not give anyone a free pass. If you are in power, consider yourself on notice. If you do not deliver, they will challenge you at the very next opportunity. And this creates an environment of constant churn, which is a very powerful expression of voter dissatisfaction.
So, we've seen the what, the shifting votes, the volatility. Now we have to diagnose the why. What is the root cause of this persistent trust deficit? Well, the answer isn't in some grand political ideology, it's in the daily lives of the people.
And these are not abstract complaints. These are the sharp, cutting edges of a broken system. A road so bad that a 25-kilometer journey becomes a 3-hour ordeal. Think about that. A bus service, the only lifeline for so many, that's completely unreliable. Government officials who are simply not there when you need them. A town that has worse amenities than its surrounding villages.
This is the reality that has completely eroded faith in the entire political class.
You know, we have to be very clear about what this really means. At its very heart, our constitutional framework is built on the promise of human dignity. So when a road is so broken that a sick person can't reach a clinic or a child can't get to school, it's not just an inconvenience, it is a failure of governance. And more than that, it's a systemic failure to uphold the basic dignity of every single citizen.
But here's the thing. Every systemic failure creates an opportunity. The failure to deliver on something as basic as infrastructure, that becomes a chance for a challenger to champion development as the core issue. A disconnection from the people, that opens the door for a genuine listening campaign. A weak digital presence can be countered with pioneering, respectful outreach. The problem itself contains the seeds of its own solution.
A diagnosis, of course, is useless without a prescription. So now we move from analysis to action. And this isn't just a plan to win an election. It is a blueprint to restore trust and actually begin the hard work of effective governance. It's a systematic cure for that trust deficit.
The approach has to be disciplined, it has to be time-bound. We call it the 90-day win-back ladder. The first 30 days are for intake and mobilization, which means listening, not talking. Days 31 to 60 are about acceleration, translating what you've heard into a concrete policy promise. The final 30 days, saturation, making sure every single voter has been reached personally and respectfully. It's a ladder, you see, with each step building on the one before it.
And this ladder is supported by a four-faced or Chaturmukha doctrine. Every element has to be perfectly aligned. Electorally, the pivot must be to a development-first narrative. Organizationally, booth-level teams have to be rebuilt from the ground up. The narrative must be a compelling Nagaland-first story of real empowerment. And finally, resources must be mobilized in a targeted way to support this unified strategy.
But a strategy needs an anchor, a soul. A phrase like "tening thinachina pai," Tenning's own voice, shifts the entire frame. It's no longer about a party's voice or a leader's voice. It's about amplifying the voice of the people themselves. It makes the entire campaign about them, their needs, their dignity. It says, we are here to listen and we are here to serve.
And as we talk about outreach, especially digital outreach, we must introduce a non-negotiable principle. Engaging with voters digitally must be grounded in absolute respect for their privacy and their consent. Any use of data has to be transparent and purposeful, fully aligned with India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act. The whole point is to build trust, not break it. Technology should always be a tool for connection, never for intrusion.
This brings us to the final and I think the most important part of our journey. We've looked at the data, we've built a strategy, but for what? To what end? The true purpose is to connect this entire blueprint back to the lives of the people that it's meant to serve. This is the bridge from data to dignity.
The path starts with an honest diagnosis, using data. It then moves to building a blueprint that's based on real human grievances. The execution has to be disciplined and integrated. And it's through this process that one earns the right to govern. The ultimate goal is never victory itself, but to transform the mandate into tangible, measurable improvements in the daily lives of the people of Tenning. And so we are left with a fundamental question, a question that any person who seeks public office must ask themselves. What is the true purpose of political power? Is it the chair, the title, the authority? Or is it to repair the roads that carry our children to school and our sick to the hospital? The answer to that question defines the difference between a politician and a public servant.
If you want to become a people-centric leader and uplift your constituency, get in touch with blueprintstrategies.ai at mgr@blueprintstrategies.ai or call 080-420-41602. Purpose beyond politics.